What's up guys, Travis with TCustomz Productionz, TCustomz.com, and I want to do something a little bit different. I want to talk about a particular sampling tip, or maybe some sampling tips that kind of I apply to a lot of my records. I think that with the various beat making videos and other videos, breakdown videos that I put up, there might be some confusion on, I sit down and bang out an 8-bar sequence like that was actually done in one take. And sometimes it is if I'm using a loop, or I've already got kind of an idea of exactly what I want a sample sequence to sound like, especially in the case when I've got a number of sample slices that I won't even spread out across this 49 key keyboard that maybe goes into 80, 100, and I just go in and really fine chop up a record. It's very difficult for me to sit down and create a full sequence in one take. So the way that I approach these type of records, specifically this record that I'm going to play for you here, or at least use as a demonstration, it was a track that I just recently dropped. It's called Be There, and it's sampling pretty well-known record, and I knew I wasn't going to go in there and just loop it up, chop it up, but I just went in and found all these little pieces, phrases, and stabs that I think I could potentially use. I ended up having 81 sample slices, and so now I have to marry parts from the beginning, the middle, and the end and make that all make sense in a 4-bar, 8-bar, 16-bar sequence or loop. And so when I'm first starting to experiment, I don't just sit down and come up with a 4-bar sequence right away all the time. Once I have the record chopped, I'll get in and I'll say, okay, what catches my attention first? What pieces can I start with? Maybe I'm starting to work on, say, the beginning of the sample sequence. Okay, let's try to find 2 or 3, maybe 4 sample slices that I can at least get the ball rolling on this sequence. So this particular track, I didn't even start with a drum pattern or anything. I just got in and started experimenting with some of these chops. And what I found was these 3 sample chops, and I was like, okay, this might be a pretty cool beginning to start this track off with. So I started with, and at this point, I'm trying to experiment and find other pieces that might go after that. But if I don't find something right away, if I think this could potentially start my sequence, I'll just go ahead and record this part in. So I set this up with, like, say, a 2-bar loop. And so now that loops back around. Okay, so I haven't lost that idea. Many times, at least in my experience, if I don't get an idea out and translated into some sort of audio or MIDI or some sort of musical form, sometimes I'll lose it. And maybe you've been in a creative state too, where you have an idea, or maybe you played something on the keys before, you play something on guitar, and then you try to replay it and you don't remember what it was. And it's kind of the same idea when you're approaching these sample chops. You know, if you get something and it sounds good to you in the moment, take a second out and go ahead and just get that translated into your software. Whether you use it later or not, you can always delete it, but at least have it there. That way you'll have a basis to start and you can kind of build off of that. I think one of the most important things to keep in mind when you're sampling is to trust your ear and to not be afraid to experiment, because I've found personally that when I get in and I don't feel confined to a certain formula to create and say, okay, well, I have to record in 1 bar, I have to record in 4 bars. No, I just record a couple sample chops and I'll discover things that I wouldn't normally have come across had I not taken that approach. I think one of the ways that I try to look at it is like putting together a puzzle. So when you sit down to put together a puzzle, what's the approach that you might take on putting that together? Well, one approach you could take is if there's distinguishable pieces or distinguishable parts in that puzzle. Let's say, for instance, you have a blue sky and a yellow balloon. Let's say this is for argument's sake, let's say that's your puzzle, and you want to try to put together this whole entire thing. So you could potentially start with that yellow balloon, because you can easily identify those pieces, and translating that, taking that back to creating a beat out of a sample. That balloon could be whatever particular sample chops that really grabbed your attention to begin with. And so you could start with those, even though it may not necessarily be at the beginning of the sequence or at the end of the sequence. It might just be some filler in between, but you could start with that just to get a foundation going. And then another approach that a lot of people take when they put together a puzzle is, what do? Start with the edges. Those are a lot more easy to identify. And so you can start with those edge pieces and taking it back to making a beat. I've got the first 3 chops to start the sequence. I had this as a start and didn't have anything else in the middle for now, I could go ahead and skip to the end and say, okay, what kind of turnaround could I have at the end of 4 bars or 8 bars? So when that loops back around to the beginning, it's all going to blend and make sense. So I like that. I don't know where that's going to eventually fit in with the mix. It's going to be at the end of maybe the 4 or 8 bar, but I'll just go ahead and record it in. I mean, there's no sense in not just getting the ideas out. So you got the beginning. And so now you've kind of got your edges formed, and now you can go back and kind of fill in the gaps and make everything transition and get the melodies the way that you like. At the end of the day, sampling can potentially be easy process, and in many cases, the way that I approach it, it takes me a lot of time to sit down and meticulously chop the records and really kind of massage it and manipulate them to the way that I want the melodies to sound. But it just comes down to practice, just like with anything. The more you do it, the better you're gonna get. Go through the various samples that you have. You come up with a little sequence. Top of my head, I'm not 100% sure, how long this sample sequence took me to create, but I just don't want you to get the idea that because you see maybe a beat making video of me putting together a sample sequence in a matter of 30 seconds, that's in reality how long it took during the actual process. So the main takeaways is to experiment, try some new things out. Don't be afraid to chop a record up into multiple pieces. It might be more of a process to kind of collage everything together, but sometimes it can make for some really dope tracks. And in particular for those records where you may not have a set idea of what you want to do, you like a lot of what's there, but you're not sure, get an experiment. Chop it up in multiple places. Take parts from the beginning, middle, and end, and use this kind of like piecing approach to patch parts of the record together. So I hope this technique can help you in some way if you haven't already applied this, of just kind of taking little bits and pieces and working with a couple samples at a given time, recording them in. It's going to allow you to translate your ideas a lot quicker and hopefully come up with some really dope music. If this video, the sampling technique, was helpful at all, please like and share the video. Drop your comments below, and if you have not done so, please subscribe for more tips and videos like this. There will be a link to this final track in the description below, as well as a link to some various sound kits and drum samples that you can use in your production too. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.
Customs.